Elamville isn't a place most people know. It doesn't show up on many maps anymore, but it raised me, and everything I write traces back to it. Welcome to the first episode of Shadows and Storylines. This is the place where I'm going to give you my background and also give you the background of my writing, and we'll also discuss the books as we come to them. But in this first episode, I wanted to just let you get to know where I'm from. It's a little place called Elamville in the southeastern corner of Alabama. It has no stoplights. It has one caution light now. It used to have two, but now it has one. It used to have, when I was growing up, 2 stores. Actually 3, because my dad had one time. But 2 stores. At the most, it had 3. Now it has none. And the main thing about Elamville, I guess thing is not the operative word, but Elamville's center was the old oak tree. And my memories of it go back probably to the early 80s. I was born in 1976, a bicentennial baby. And I guess my first recollection is probably when I was maybe 6 or 7 years old. And we're talking 1982, 1983, maybe earlier 1981. By that time, Elamville had mellowed out from its history, and we'll get into its history a little bit later. But right now, I'm looking at Elamville through my 6-year-old eyes. And the oak tree was majestic, I guess the way to describe it. Looking back, you couldn't reach around it. I think it'd probably take 3 or 4 grown men to hold hands and reach around that tree. It had an old gray picnic table perched up under it. Its limbs stretched seemingly for miles when I was a kid, but it stretched a great ways and cast a lot of shade. It was right next to what would become Highway 51 that runs north and south from about Opelika, Alabama, down to around Elba, Alabama. And about halfway, you find Elamville right there in Barber County. And I remember as a child going with my dad when he farmed down to the oak tree every day at lunch, or seemingly like every day. And eating lunch or just standing around, there would probably be 15 people gathered around the oak tree in the shade in the summertime. And we're talking South Alabama summers, and we're talking about 90-something degrees, humidity that would, if you wore glasses as I did as a child, it would fog them up as you walked outside. And those hot, humid summer days, people would gather under that tree for the shade. Now, we're still talking early 80s. There was air conditioning, but my grandmother didn't have air conditioning in her house until I was probably a teenager. If she did, she didn't run it. But up under that tree, I can remember there were farmers, people that worked with REA, the Rural Electric Association. There were mail carriers. There were store owners. There were old men, retired. And they gathered there to play dominoes most every day. And I don't remember sitting at the table. I guess it was reserved for people who were actually playing dominoes at the time. But I would stand around. I remember an old dog named Buddy would be there with his owner. And I remember people calling me John Henry because my middle name was John. And I remember the mail carrier. He lived in Clayton. He's later sheriff of this county. He would do the little trick where you take your finger off. And, as I can't do it, but you can do it with your thumb. And it seems like, your finger's actually coming off your hand. And as a child, I'd ask him to hold it. And he would say, no, you may drop it in that sand right there and I can't put it back on. And those are my earliest memories of Elamville, gathered around that tree in the hot summertime of Alabama. And to give you a little geographical idea of where Elamville sits, we're about 105 miles north of the Gulf of Mexico, or the Gulf, as we'll call it. We're about 200 miles southwest of Atlanta and about 80 miles southeast, slightly southeast of Montgomery. I mean, right in the corner of the state of Alabama, a place known as the Wiregrass and also known as the Tri-States. Because from right there in Elamville, you're 50 miles from the Georgia line, you're 50 miles from the Florida line. So it's right there in the corner. And it's really, especially back then, largely a farming community. Most everybody farmed full time. And I grew up on a farm. My dad farmed full time when I was born up until the mid 80s. And that's a story for another day. But I can remember a store right on the other side of the little street that I grew up on. And I can remember a little, it wasn't really a store, it was a building. And here lately, I learned that that's where the old men played dominoes when it was raining. They all chipped in and kept propane during the wintertime so they could stay warm. And my dad had a store in there for a short period of time. But I remember most about it is voting. That's where everybody voted in Elamville, was that old blue store. And I'm colorblind. It may have been a different color, but I remember it as blue. And it was built on like a little ditch right off the highway. I remember sitting at the oak tree or standing around, whatever, and it was on piers in the back. Now, the front was, flat on the ground, but as the further you went, it was a steep drop, and the little building was built on like a little pier. I remember the voting machine, old-timey, old-style 1980s voting machines where you walk in and you pull a lever and the curtain closed behind you, and you checked with a lever who you wanted to vote for. Then you'd have a big lever and you turn it, and you could hear the mechanisms turning in there as you voted. And that was a thrill to me. I was always enthralled with politics and voting. And I remember casting my first vote. It was actually my father's vote. It had to be in 1988. So I was 12 at the time. And we went in there. I believe it was 88 because that was George H.W. Bush's election. And we were voting in the Democratic, as most people did back then in this area, in the Democratic primary, and I voted for Gary Hart. And I don't know why. Maybe it was his name. Maybe I seen him on TV, but my dad let me vote for whoever I wanted to, and I voted for Gary Hart, and this was in 1988. Not long after that, he got caught up in some kind of scandal and dropped out of the election. But that was my first vote cast in that little building next to the oak tree. Getting back to Elamville itself, though, just give you an idea of what the town looked like. You come from Clio on Highway 51, and it's like you come down a little hill, and there used to be, well, there still is, the Elamville old school building right there on the left. You come down the little hill, and there's a road to the left and a road to the right, and you had this oak tree right there, and that was considered downtown. But I learned that originally, Elamville was built where Elam Church was located, which is about a half mile off the highway because it was kind of close to the trail that became Highway 51, and it was also about halfway to Pea River, which was about a half mile right there as the crow flies through the woods. But as the railroad came through, and we're talking the Central of Georgia Railroad, that had a spur that ran from Eufaula, Alabama, right on the Alabama-Georgia border, down through Clayton and Clio, through Elamville and Ayrton, up to Ozark. And the railroad ran right behind the oak tree. And through the little town, I remember where I grew up, I could barely remember that train. And I remember it It was like right behind my house. I don't remember it coming through. I remember the tracks there. I remember when they took up the tracks. My sister remembers when the train came through and the guy in the caboose, and this was back when they had cabooses in trains, would throw candy to kids as they passed by. Now, I don't remember that, but that is it's a little speck. It's a railroad community. It's a farming community. It's small, very close knit. Most people around the town were related. And we'll get into the history of Elamville a little bit later. But I wanted to kind of give you the idea of what kind, if you pictured a small farming community in the early 80s, that would be Elamville. And there's always tractors rumbling by. I remember my dad had a big Ford 7700 I loved riding on. He had a big white 2105. He had an old Oliver tractor that we called Ragmop. And why we called it Ragmop, I have no idea, but it was worn out. It was probably one of his first tractors. But there was always tractors rolling by because this was a peanut farming area when I was coming up. Cotton had pretty much wore out the land, back in the day, and the area was pretty much focused all on peanuts. Peanuts was my entire life growing up. We planted peanuts. We took care of peanuts. We picked peanuts. I remember riding on the tractor with my dad to the field and my grandmother coming to get me and taking me back home. I just remember those days. And today, when I roll through and it's the fall, maybe September, early October, and people are picking peanuts, that smell, it's a unique smell. It's a very earthy smell. I love that smell. I love going by peanut fields that's being picked. I love going by hay fields that's just been cut. But that was Elamville, and that was kind of, straight up farming community. And I loved growing up there. But getting to my roots in Elamville, now the Pelhams, I don't think lived here very long. They kind of married into one of the founding families of the area, the Dansbys. My great-great-grandfather was Nick Dansby. His actual name was Isham Beal, Beal, Dansby, and everybody called him Nick. For what reason, I have no idea. But the Dansbys, the Downers, they were pretty much the first settlers of this area when it opened up, and they came in from Georgia way back in the day. And I don't have a lot of information on the Dansbys. There's information out there, but as far as personal stories, my grandmother was a great historian of this area, and I wish I'd gotten her stories down before she passed away. And she passed away in 2009. Born in 1913, she lived to be 96 years old. I hope I have those genes. But just when you think of Elamville, picture tractors, picture peanut fields, picture that oak tree. That oak tree means a lot to me. It's gone now. Lightning struck it a few years ago and they eventually cut it down. And the picnic table's still there, and thank goodness a man named Mr. Eugene McClendon planted another oak tree right there. And it's growing, and maybe by the time I'm an old man, I get to see it at full growth, and it'll be there, but it'll never replace the old oak tree in Elamville and the memories there. And as we go along in this, it's going to be like a diary to me, I guess. I don't know, a journal about me thinking about where I grew up. And we'll get into the books. I don't want to get into the books right off. In the next episode, I'm going to go into my life a little bit, my background. But right now, I want you to think about Elamville before we get into me. And I'll have pictures. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see some pictures that I put on here. And if you're listening in other places, I'll have those pictures somehow. And if you can't get them there, just come back to YouTube and watch it on here if you get a chance, and you'll see some of the pictures that I've accumulated over the years of old Elamville. And I appreciate you listening to this. I'm probably pretty boring, but as we go along, there won't be long podcasts because I don't want to keep going and on because I do get on tangents and I do talk about things. I am a teacher and I've been known as the teacher that goes off topic a lot. So I'm going to try to keep these focused. This first podcast just gave you a little background on Elamville, and I'll describe Elamville further as we go along and some of the stories that I remember and some of the things that happened here before I was born, back when it was a pretty rough place. And that's going to be an episode on its own, how a place that you would just drive through, not even look twice, maybe slow down for the caution light before you went into the curve. But roll back 100 years, and if you came through here at night, there's a good chance that you'd see a fight in the street or death in the street. And that'll be an episode all on its own. But as far as everything, I'm happy to have you here. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me in different ways. And if you get a chance and you want to read some Southern Noir stories that I've written, they're Perfidious Tides, Last Castle in the Sky, and Live the Last Day. As you're listening to this, all three of those books will be out and they're available. And you can go to my website, pelhampew.com, and I'll direct you in the right place. But until next time, thank you, and I'll talk to you later.